My name is Megan, 22 years old, and I learned the hard way that saying yes to everything your family asks can trap you in a life that isn't your own. After graduating college with my finance degree, I moved back to my small hometown in Ohio with what seemed like a simple plan. I would stay with my parents for a few months, find a job, save money, and then move out to start my independent life. What I didn't expect was how quickly that temporary arrangement would become a permanent burden that would consume the next year of my life. Within my first week home, I landed a job as a financial analyst at a local company. The pay wasn't amazing, but it was steady work with decent benefits. I felt proud walking through the front door that evening, ready to share my good news with my parents. Instead of the celebration I expected, my parents sat me down for what they called an important conversation. My mother explained that her arthritis had been getting worse, forcing her to reduce her hours at the library where she worked. My father's hours at the auto shop had also been cut, with talks of more layoffs coming. They needed help with the household expenses, they said, just until things stabilized. They weren't asking for rent, just assistance with utilities and groceries. Looking back, that moment was when I should have established clear boundaries. Instead, guilt overwhelmed me. These were my parents who had supported me through college. How could I say no when they needed help? I agreed to contribute, thinking it would be temporary and manageable. Over the following months, I fell into a routine that slowly drained my savings and energy. Each month, I handed over a significant portion of my salary to cover household expenses. Beyond the money, I found myself running errands for my mother when her arthritis flared up, helping my father with computer tasks he struggled with, and taking on various household responsibilities that seemed to multiply over time. Whenever I mentioned wanting to save money for my own place, my mother would sigh deeply and make comments about how nice it must be to think about moving out when everyone else was struggling. My father would shake his head and talk about how some people don't understand how hard it is to make ends meet. The guilt was subtle but constant, wearing me down like water on stone. My social life disappeared as I couldn't afford to go out with friends anymore. My dream of exploring the city faded as my savings account remained stubbornly small. When I suggested getting a second job to save money faster, my mother's only response was to make sure it wouldn't interfere with what the family needed. The situation became even more complicated when my older sister Megan arrived unexpectedly one evening with her husband Franks and their 2 young children. They had lost their apartment and needed a place to stay temporarily. Within minutes of their arrival, my parents were treating them like war heroes returning from battle, immediately offering comfort and support. Without any discussion, I became the designated babysitter for my sister's 5-year-old daughter and 3-year-old son. What started as watching them for an hour while Megan and Franks ran errands quickly escalated to full days of childcare while they went out for extended brunches and social activities. Every weekend became a marathon of watching children's shows, preventing the toddler from eating craft supplies, and managing constant requests for snacks and attention. When I tried to push back, I was told I was being dramatic and that I didn't understand the pressures of having a family. My own work and exhaustion were dismissed because I was single and supposedly had fewer responsibilities. The financial strain intensified with 2 additional adults and 2 children in the house. Grocery bills doubled, utility costs soared, and I found myself covering expenses for 5 people instead of 3. When I asked my sister and her husband to contribute, they claimed they were barely getting by and couldn't help with any costs. My bedroom became my only sanctuary, but even that wasn't safe from the chaos. The children would burst in unexpectedly, leaving toys and food crumbs everywhere. I felt like a prisoner in what was supposed to be my temporary home. The breaking point came when I overheard my mother on the phone planning a family vacation to Florida. She was discussing how the whole family would attend my aunt's retirement celebration except for me. I would stay behind to watch the children, she explained, because it just made sense and the kids wouldn't enjoy the adult event anyway. I hadn't been consulted about this arrangement. I wasn't even told about the trip until I directly asked. When I brought it up at dinner, my family acted as if my exclusion was obvious and natural. I was told I wouldn't want to come anyway since I didn't know many people there and, besides, someone needed to watch the children. The casual dismissal of my feelings and the assumption that I would sacrifice my weekend for their convenience revealed how little my family valued my time and autonomy. I was seen as the reliable helper, not as a person with my own desires and needs. That night, I made a decision that would change everything. I contacted a college friend who had mentioned a camping trip that same weekend. Initially, I had declined thinking I would be stuck babysitting, but now it seemed like the perfect opportunity to reclaim some control over my life. I spent the week secretly preparing for my escape. On Saturday morning, I woke up before dawn, packed my camping gear, and quietly left the house while everyone was still sleeping. For the first time in months, I felt truly free. The camping trip was exactly what I needed. Surrounded by friends who didn't expect anything from me except my company, I remembered what it felt like to enjoy myself without guilt or obligation. I hiked through beautiful trails, sat around campfires sharing stories, and slept under the stars. For 2 full days, I was just myself, not the family helper or the reliable babysitter. When I returned home Sunday evening, I walked into chaos. My family was furious that I had disappeared without notice. They had apparently panicked when they discovered I wasn't home Saturday morning, immediately assuming the worst. Instead of considering that I might have gone somewhere for myself, they called Child Protective Services, claiming I had abandoned the children. The argument that followed was intense and revealing. My sister accused me of being selfish and irresponsible. My parents talked about how I had abandoned my family responsibilities. They couldn't understand why I had left without permission or why I thought I had the right to make my own plans. I tried to explain that I had never agreed to babysit that weekend, that they had simply assumed I would be available without asking me. I pointed out that calling Child Protective Services was an extreme overreaction to my absence. The children belonged to their parents, not to me, and I had no legal obligation to watch them. The confrontation made clear that my family saw me as an extension of their needs rather than as an individual with my own life. They expected me to be constantly available, to sacrifice my time and money for their benefit, and to do so without complaint or recognition. In the days that followed, the tension in the house became unbearable. My sister barely spoke to me, making passive-aggressive comments about unreliable babysitters. My parents tried to act normal while sending subtle guilt messages about family loyalty and responsibility. I realized that no amount of time or discussion would change the fundamental dynamic. My family had become dependent on my contributions, both financial and practical, and they had no intention of letting me establish boundaries or independence. The conversation with my aunt, who had noticed my absence from the Florida trip, gave me the courage I needed. She validated my feelings and confirmed that my family was taking advantage of me. She reminded me that I was young and shouldn't be tied down by obligations that weren't truly mine. With her support, I began making concrete plans to leave. I found a small apartment I could afford and gave my parents notice that I would no longer be contributing to household expenses. The announcement triggered another family crisis, with accusations of selfishness and abandonment. My sister was particularly angry, demanding to know how they would manage without my financial contributions. I reminded her that their situation wasn't my responsibility to solve. I had already sacrificed a year of my life and most of my savings to help them, and it was time for me to focus on my own future. Moving out was both terrifying and liberating. The first few days in my own apartment felt surreal after months of chaos and constant demands. My phone buzzed with guilt-inducing messages from my family, but I gradually learned to ignore them. My aunt continued to offer support and encouragement, reminding me that standing up for myself was necessary and healthy. She helped me understand that family love doesn't require self-sacrifice and that enabling others' dependence isn't actually helping them. Over the following months, I slowly rebuilt my life. I reconnected with old friends, developed new hobbies, and began saving money for future goals. I maintained distance from my family, responding to their messages only when necessary and refusing to be drawn back into their drama. The experience taught me valuable lessons about boundaries, self-worth, and the difference between helping others and enabling them. I learned that saying no to unreasonable demands isn't selfish, it's necessary for maintaining your own well-being and autonomy. I also discovered that family relationships should be based on mutual respect and consideration, not on guilt and obligation. True family support means wanting the best for each other, including respecting each person's right to make their own choices and live their own life. My parents eventually had to figure out their financial situation without my contributions. My sister and her husband were forced to find their own housing and childcare arrangements. While this created temporary hardship for them, it also pushed them to develop independence and take responsibility for their own lives. The guilt and family pressure were difficult to overcome, but I learned that other people's opinions about my choices couldn't dictate my life. I had to choose between pleasing my family and building my own future, and I chose myself. Today, I'm grateful for the experience because it taught me to recognize and resist manipulation, even when it comes from people I love. I learned that helping others should be a choice, not an obligation, and that maintaining your own well-being isn't selfish, it's essential. The most important lesson was understanding that you can't build a healthy life on the foundation of guilt and resentment. True happiness comes from making choices that align with your own values and goals, even when those choices are difficult or unpopular with others. My story isn't unique, but it's a reminder that sometimes the people closest to us can become the biggest obstacles to our growth and independence. Learning to set boundaries with family members is one of the most challenging but necessary skills for building a fulfilling adult life. The months following my move were filled with both challenges and discoveries. I had to learn how to manage my finances without the safety net of living at home, but I also discovered how much money I actually had when I wasn't supporting for other people. My small apartment became a sanctuary where I could make my own decisions about how to spend my time and energy. I started attending networking events in my field, something I had never had time for while managing my family's needs. These connections led to new opportunities and helped me realize how much my career had stagnated while I was focused on being the family helper. I began taking online courses to improve my skills, investing in my own professional development for the first time since college. The hardest part was dealing with the emotional aftermath of cutting ties with my family's expectations. I had been conditioned to feel guilty whenever I prioritized my own needs, and breaking that pattern required conscious effort every day. I started seeing a counselor who helped me understand that my family's reaction to my boundaries was actually proof that those boundaries were necessary. My counselor helped me recognize patterns I had learned in childhood that made me vulnerable to manipulation. I was the responsible one, the helper, the one who could be counted on to sacrifice for others. These roles had been assigned to me so early that I had never questioned whether they were fair or healthy. Through therapy, I learned to distinguish between genuine requests for help and demands disguised as requests. I discovered that healthy families ask for help while respecting the other person's right to say no. They express gratitude for assistance and don't make the helper feel guilty for having their own needs and limitations. I also learned about the concept of emotional labor and how it's often unfairly distributed in families. I had been carrying the emotional weight of keeping everyone happy and stable, while my own emotional needs were ignored or dismissed. Understanding this helped me realize that my decision to leave wasn't abandonment, it was self-preservation. The isolation from my family was painful, but it also created space for me to rebuild relationships that had been neglected. I reconnected with college friends who had stopped reaching out because I was never available. I developed new friendships with people who knew me as an individual, not as someone's daughter or sister or the family helper. One of the most surprising discoveries was how much I had lost touch with my own interests and preferences. When you spend all your time managing other people's needs, you forget what you actually enjoy doing. I started exploring hobbies I had abandoned, trying new activities, and discovering parts of myself that had been buried under years of obligation. I began traveling, starting with small weekend trips to nearby cities. Each adventure felt like a small rebellion against the old version of myself who would have stayed home to be available for whatever my family needed. I was learning that my time and energy were valuable resources that deserved to be invested in my own growth and happiness. The financial independence was empowering in ways I hadn't expected. I could buy things I wanted without justifying the expense to anyone. I could save money for my own goals without feeling guilty about not contributing to someone else's needs. I started planning for bigger purchases and longer-term financial goals, something that had been impossible when most of my income was going to my family. My relationship with work also changed dramatically. Without the constant stress of managing family drama and childcare responsibilities, I had more energy and focus to dedicate to my job. My performance improved, and I began receiving recognition for my contributions. I even started considering opportunities for advancement that would have been impossible when I was tied to my hometown by family obligations. The experience taught me that sometimes the most loving thing you can do for someone is to stop enabling their dependence on you. My family was forced to develop their own solutions and coping strategies, which ultimately made them stronger and more self-sufficient. My sister and her husband found stable housing and learned to manage their own childcare needs. My parents adjusted their budget to match their actual income. I learned to recognize the difference between helping someone in a genuine crisis and becoming someone's permanent support system. True help empowers people to solve their own problems, while enabling keeps them dependent and prevents them from developing necessary life skills. The guilt still surfaces sometimes, especially during holidays or family milestones. I've learned to sit with those feelings without letting them drive my decisions. I remind myself that feeling guilty doesn't mean I've done something wrong. It just means I'm breaking patterns that have been ingrained for years. I've also learned that setting boundaries isn't a one-time event. It's an ongoing process. People who are used to having unlimited access to your time and energy will often test those boundaries repeatedly. Maintaining them requires consistent enforcement and the willingness to accept that some people may not like your new limits. My relationship with my aunt grew stronger during this time. She became a model for what healthy family relationships could look like, offering support without demanding sacrifice in return. She showed me that family love can exist without guilt, manipulation, or unreasonable expectations. The experience changed how I approach all my relationships, not just family ones. I learned to recognize red flags early, to communicate my boundaries clearly, and to walk away from situations that don't serve my well-being. I developed a stronger sense of self-worth that doesn't depend on how useful I am to other people. Looking back, I realized that my family's reaction to my boundaries revealed their true priorities. They were more concerned with maintaining their comfortable arrangement than with my happiness or well-being. This painful realization helped me understand that love and manipulation often get confused, especially in family dynamics. Today, I maintain limited contact with my family, mostly through my aunt who serves as a neutral intermediary. My parents occasionally send messages asking for help or money, but I've learned to decline without feeling guilty. My sister and I haven't spoken directly in over a year, and I've accepted that our relationship may never recover. The cost of my independence was high, but the alternative was spending my life serving other people's needs while neglecting my own. I chose to be the author of my own story rather than a supporting character in everyone else's drama. That choice saved my sanity, my financial future, and my self-respect. My story serves as a reminder that family relationships should enhance your life, not consume it. When family members consistently take more than they give, when they use guilt and obligation to control your choices, when they dismiss your needs in favor of their own, it's time to reevaluate those relationships and set firmer boundaries. The journey from people-pleaser to self-advocate is difficult but essential. It requires courage to disappoint people who have grown accustomed to your compliance. It means accepting that some people will label you as selfish for refusing to sacrifice your well-being for their convenience. But ultimately, it's the path to authentic relationships and genuine self-respect. Learning to say no to unreasonable demands is one of the most valuable skills anyone can develop. It protects your time, energy, and resources while forcing others to take responsibility for their own lives. It's not selfish to prioritize your own needs. It's necessary for building a healthy, sustainable life. The most important lesson from my experience is that you cannot build happiness on a foundation of resentment and obligation. True fulfillment comes from making choices that align with your values and goals, even when those choices are difficult or unpopular with others. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do for yourself and your family is to stop enabling dysfunction and start modeling healthy boundaries.